Charlotte, just for starters, how did you kind of get into lifting and powerlifting?
I was not expecting that question. Well, I got into lifting because I didn't get on well with my little sister, and I wanted to do something just to change my mind and not get in a fight with her. So I thought gym was a good option, and the commercial gym were too expensive for me as I was in high school. So I went to a small association, started to train in that association, and there was some people powerlifting in that gym, and they told me like, come try. So I said okay. There was a team competition and they needed one other person for the team, and I said okay, I'll try. And it's been 13 years since then, so that's how it started.
Yeah, you're basically a lifer at this point. And how did you kind of transition from going to that competition to being a coach?
I hate doing nothing. So when I was not competing in competitions, and I hated staying in the audience. So what I did was took my referee exam to have something to do when I was not competing. And as I took my referee exam, I became state, national, and then international referee. And taking my CAT 2 international referee, I helped the coaches for the uni team at world uni competitions, and I liked it. So I just took a shot at it and asked if I could make it the French team. And handling people is math, and I'm a mechanical engineer, so it's just numbers, and I love that. At one point, it's just you need to know your math. So of course, it's a lot more because you need to handle the lifter and it's his or her emotions and stuff like that. But I love playing with numbers and like changing tickets last second, etc. It's so much fun. So that's how I get into coaching on competition. And I wanted to take a coaching exam in France because for my PhD, we will talk about it after, but as my PhD was about squat, I wanted to be legal if I gave instructions to people in gyms. So I took a coaching diploma, and I had to coach Nico to take my exam, and it went very well. So Nico, my husband, told me that I could become a coach, and then Jason from TSG enrolled me into the internship, and that's how it began. So now I'm doing both thanks to those men.
So you were at Euros there recently enough. I think you're at junior Euros. What was it like coaching internationally? I know you've you had a bit of prior experience as well, but what's it like coaching internationally versus maybe coaching locally?
It's different because there are more pressure, and people come here to win titles for the country. So the pressure is for the athlete, but also for the coaches and for the country. And I love coaching juniors, but for most of them, it's their first experience. So coaching involves also a lot taking care of the young lifters, especially the sub-junior. We became First Nation in the male sub-junior, and it was the first time ever in the French history. But yeah, that's a lot of organization. I was not the head coach. I'm not the head coach, so I didn't have everything to do, but I love being a coach because it's intense and we always have battles to do. This year it was a lot with Great Britain, Italy, and Spain. So you got to see all the faces day after day, and you know how people coach and what they usually do, like what changes they do, if they bluff or not, or what are the strongest points. For example, Irish people are usually super strong in deadlift, and Italian people are super strong in squat. That's what we've seen, but that's an amazing experience, as always.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would imagine when you're um with your kind of background in kind of biomechanics and stuff like that, Is it kind of is it something that you look around and you're maybe watching people's technique? Are you there in a kind of a more technique capacity, or are you just there generally?
Do you mean for the French athlete or for their opponents?
Just yourself. Do you feel like you're there more kind of as guidance with technique, or are you there just
I think you can do some guidance in technique when you're coaching people, but not a lot. You're not going to change their technique on the game day. So if that was the question, usually I just try to focus on helping them meet the standards, because if they don't go deep enough, or if they don't have the elbows locked in deadlift, they will be red lighted. So that are the main points we focus on. But I can't say that I'm giving them like biomechanic tips, except maybe that force comes from the ground, because I can see a lot of people who don't have their feet stable, and that's something I've seen in my PhD. That is really a major, yeah, something we need to focus on. And so I try to focus on it, but I need to say that I've learned a lot for my PhD thanks to international competition, because watching international lifters do attempt 1RM, I can see their past, their form, and I can see that most people, for example, tend to have their center of pressure that shifts forward the toes in the whole of the squat, and only like maybe 1% have it over heels. And that's something I've studied a lot during my PhD, and that's something that doesn't appear anywhere in the literature for now. So I'm learning a lot in international competition, but I can't tell that I'm helping people with biomechanics, because I think last minute changes are not the best.
of course? You said something really interesting there, and hopefully you can tell us a bit more about it. But you were kind of talking about foot stability in the deadlift. Could you maybe tell me a little bit more about that? Maybe a little bit about your research and your findings.
Well, I've looked. Well, my PhD was about squat optimization, and the goal was to develop a mechanical model of an athlete squatting, and then optimize that model and help lifters optimize their techniques thanks to an avatar. And to do this, I used a force plate and cameras, special biomechanic motion analysis cameras. And when I did this on lifters of the French team, I realized that they had their center of pressure moving a lot during the squat. It can be up to 10 centimeters, which is a lot. So I've looked into the literature to see if there was something like this, and there's not. And when I try to implement my model with another degree of mobility on the foot, it told me that the center of pressure needed to be above heels in the whole of the squat to minimize the energy expenditure, while it's the exact opposite that happens when you squat for most of the lifters I've seen. So that's interesting, because it shows that the human is trying to adapt, well, is adapting. And I'm sure that all those international lifters are doing maybe a movement is the most efficient for them. So I spend a lot of time trying to understand why this happened. I think it's to help the ankle extensor contract to create kind of a lever arm that this happens. I don't have the answer yet, and I'm sure I will work on it later. But yeah, that's a point. I worked a lot on it. And even in mechanic, a simple concept is that for every action, there is a reaction. So if you want to lift the bar, you need to push the floor. And so if you want to push, you need to be stable on the floor. So it's really something I look, because the force basically comes from the ground. And of course,
No,
if you lose stability, you won't be able to push. And also what I've seen is that in deadlift, for example, people sometimes try to move their center of pressure over heels at the end of the movement, but when they do so, I'm not sure if I can explain, but if that's my leg, the bar is here, is in front of the leg, and the center of pressure is over heels. The bar will tend to go into your leg to align with the center of pressure, so it will rub more, and then you will probably have some tight support, or you won't be able to finish the lift just because of this simple mechanical principle that is the action reaction.
I was going to ask in regards to the foot stability in the squat. So obviously you mentioned there in regards to the foot pressure changing in response to like the center of mass. Would I be correct? Like moving across the base of support, so the foot. How can like lifters think about their foot pressure during squat? Like, is there anything they should actively be thinking about on the descent or the ascent? You know, you would hear typically people may say maybe you want to stay a little bit more on the outside of your foot on the way down, maybe a little bit more externally rotated, but not too externally rotated. And then maybe trying to supinate, or sorry, go into some pronation at the bottom, potentially increase the surface area of the foot. Like, what would your kind of thought process be there? And how would you typically coach lifters with that?
I can't tell about pronation and supination because I've done my researches in 2D, so I couldn't see the impact of the foot position. But I would say that might sound stupid, but I would say that they need to push on their heels, because really they will save energy, because for the same position, for the same tight position, if you want to have your center of pressure over toes, you need to bend way more your hips. So it will be longer to get to the finished position. Whereas if you're quite upright, it will be easier for you. So you need to push over heels, but try to stay stable. And it's really, I think the tripod is a good thing, but I've heard some coaches saying that your center of pressure should be motionless in the middle, under the middle of the foot, and I think that's not the best tip you can give to your athletes. Just let their body move, because it does move.
I think the fact that you have noticed a pattern between the lifters that you assessed, so most of them having the center pressure moving slightly in front of the middle of the foot, would I be correct in that's what you said?
I'm saying it's moving, it's over heels when they are in the starting position. When they do the eccentric, it moves toward the front of the foot, and when they push back, it moves toward the heels again. And my optimal control model said that it should be over heels in the whole of the squat, so it should do the opposite.
That makes sense. Could you kind of maybe go through a little bit, Charlotte, on what that optimal control model might look like and maybe what it is?
Yes. So as I told you, I developed a model. So it was basically 4 bar models. So just foot, shin, tight, and torso with the bar fixed on the torso. And I wanted to know what was the best form, the best option to do the squat. So I began by saying maybe we need to minimize the sum of the torques, for example, at the sticking point. But when the tight is close to parallel, this sum is the same whatever your position is. So if you're putting a lot of ankle flexion or not ankle flexion, it's always the same sum. The only thing that can reduce this sum is to put your center of pressure over heels, as I told you, but it seems to not be what athletes tend to do. And so after that, I needed to find another function to optimize my model. So I went into energy expenditure. I tried to calculate what is the shape to what at how athletes need to squat to minimize the energy expenditure. And as I had many possibilities, I did some genetic algorithm. So genetic algorithm is it's like nature. For example, at the beginning, let's imagine there were 10 giraffes and they all had short neck. But after some generations, some giraffes had longer neck, so they were able to eat more. So those ones survived more than the other ones, and the other ones died. So now giraffes have long neck. Well, that's what I've used to try to optimize the motion. And thanks to this genetic algorithm, I found one motion depending on the segment lengths of the athlete that seems to be optimal from an energy expenditure point of view. But as I told you, I can see some similarities with what the athlete do. Like the motion is realistic, but it's not exactly the same.
And for you, kind of, Charlotte, then, has much of your PhD or much of that work in that modeling, has that kind of informed your coaching or maybe how you approach technique analysis in the squat?
It has a kind of, because as I told you, I didn't have the results I was expecting. So I was expecting to find one solution per person. I thought that there was no one fits all solution, but that I could find one solution depending on your anthropometrics. But what I've learned is that the human is not a mechanical model. It can't be reduced to this. And I think that now when I see someone squatting, I'd like to see him like on his sticking point and even fail a lift just to see what are his strengths and his weakness. And I think the most important is to strengthen. For example, if you see someone that has a good morning style squat, well, maybe you need to strengthen his squat. And that might sound very basic, but from what I've learned is that your body will put himself into the position it feels the strongest under heavy loads. So you just need to analyze this position to see what are your weaknesses and what are your strengths and work on this. And of course, there are basic concepts like, as I told you, the foot stability. You need to be stable and you need to have rigid segment, because if your torso is moving in the squat, for example, you will lose energy, of course.
Yeah, of course. So maybe even when you said about that torso position, where I suppose it's kind of a new phenomenon maybe in powerlifting, where you'll see lifters that'll pre-hinge prior to the commencement of the concentric phase of the squat. Could you maybe talk a little bit maybe about torso position, and I'll ask you about that pre-hinge then maybe afterwards.
Yes. So first of all, if you pre-hinge, make sure you will have the start command from the referee, because I've seen, especially in France, a lot that some lifters don't have the start command. But I think it helps them activate their glutes. But in the end, if you pre-hinge, you're gonna start by flexing your hip and then flexing your knee. And if you do this one after the other, it will have even more impact on the center of pressure position, as I told you. So I can't really tell it's the best idea to squat, because in the end, when you will finish your hip flexion, you will put a lot of ankle flexion to reach depth, and you will go maybe lower. The bar will be lower than you need to, but your hips won't be that low. So I don't have any strong opinion on that. I'd rather tell my lifters to try to flex knees and hips at the same time to control that center of pressure, because whatever happens, it's not useful to make it move a lot front back all the way through the squat.
Yeah, 100%. It's one thing I see an awful lot. I see an awful lot of is lifters will have a pre-hinge where, and I suppose, like you said, where they'll initiate hip flexion prior to knee flexion, and then it ends up being the case that they struggle to hit depth. But I don't think an awful lot of the time they see that when they emphasize hip flexion an awful lot on the squat, that they're minimizing the ability of the ankle to dorsiflex. And then
Yes.
they're either struggle with depth, or they end up shifting the load heavily onto their hip extensors when they could be quite a quad dominant or quite strong across the quads. Um, and I suppose it's a phenomenon we've seen, and a lot of people will maybe further, without maybe thinking about it, mimic their
Yeah.
favorite online favorite TikTok lifter, their favorite lifter on Instagram, and there are some extremely strong lifters following that kind of pre-hinge. But I suppose, like you said earlier, there is no predetermined, or there's no one size fits all recommendations as regards the squat.
Yes, I really think that we should all experiment about their foot positioning, their timing on hip, knee, and ankle flexion, the head positioning, because if you feel stable and strong, that's probably that's probably the best. With mechanics and stuff like that, we've created many devices to measure uh, angles or muscle contraction, but the best indicator and the mechanism that has most indicator is still your body. So if you're able to listen to your body and really tell how you feel and not how you look compared to someone else, that will be how you will progress the most. And I think that's something that elite lifters know how to do the best.
Mm.
No, 100% you're right. I think even uh, when you start with someone new, a lot of the time, and you said two words there that I would always kind of reiterate, would be what feels strong, what feels stable. And I think from what you said earlier as regards foot stability and torso stability, where those are two kind of key starting points from which to build your technique or build the foundations of your technique from. I think in that case, if you can be strong and stable, and then there might be small deviations over time in regards to what you cue, but I think once those two pillars are set, you kind of have
Yeah.
a good foundation there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. And I think that some lifters, as a coach, I've learned over time that if lifters always send you all their videos every day, for example, and always ask for what you think, in the end, you're not helping them because they don't know how to feel and they just want to look good for the coach, but they don't really listen to themselves. And yeah,
Mm.
I think even if that's not something that seems uh, natural. Or, for example, if you see Leah and Tiffany from France squatting, they were the first ones. Like Leah was literally the first one. And to be honest, I've never felt stable during squat while I was squatting before. I was always squatting with feet around hip under hip, so quite large, and I could feel that at the sticking point I could not transfer force. And thanks to people thinking out of the box and trying new techniques, I've been squatting super narrow for 1 year, and it feels the best. I'm literally strongest like this, and I can feel it. So I really think that you need to listen to your body, trust yourself, and experiment, even if it doesn't look like the standards or like what you see on Instagram or whatever. As long as you
Mm.
respect the standards, yeah, don't fear to experiment.
Yeah, like I think it's important for lifters to take notes during their sessions. Like that's one thing when I am training and I have like a good set of squats, for example, I'll typically take notes of the type of cues I was running through my mind. And as well, if I have squats that don't feel good, I'll do the exact same. because if you're working with the kind of average intensities that you might use during a powerlifting program, like, you know, if you're doing like volume with like 75%, that should feel pretty easy. But if your technique is maybe not as good as another day, it could feel a lot harder. So being able to take notes and kind of self-assess what feels like the best bar path for you, what feels like the best foot pressure, what feels like the best level of bracing. All of these things can just help to improve your work as you get towards like the higher intensities too, because that's when ultimately a lot of those small deviations in technique will start to add up a lot more. Being a lot more kind of self-aware in that kind of regard. Again, your coach can only see so much when they're looking at a video. Like, we can assess,
Yes.
you know, the major deviations, but I can't tell you the level of brace that you felt on your triple. You know, only you can tell me that. And again, just it comes back to the self-awareness, taking some notes, similar to how you track how many reps you did on your squat, what weight you did. Track, you know, what are the cues that you run through in your mind, the unrack, elbow position, like packed into your lats. Did you have a pre-hinge? Did you have a forward lean? Those kind of things.
Yeah, especially, and also from a mental point of view, I've done some mental prep, and I think it's really important that you have those cues and you focus on those cues in competition to have something to remember, because sometime in competition, especially international competition, there are so many outside stimulus and you can be lost in all the things. So if you're able to remember what you do in training when it works well and focus on like 3 key points, for example, it's going to help you a lot.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think even for the most advanced lifters, and you can get extremely caught up in the moment and the emotion and the hype of it all. So Charlotte, was there any kind of, I suppose, while your research was heavily focused on squat, and we've talked a little bit about the foot position and the deadlift, are there any kind of interesting things you found that maybe cross over to the bench press?
Honestly, no, I've not worked at all on the bench press, but I'm in contact with a new startup in France that's name is My Smart Move, and they created some capsules that um, can register the motion, and you can use them into training, and they can analyze your position. So I'm sure soon we will have maybe other companies that work on the same subject, and we will be able to work on the talks and stuff like that on athletes. So I haven't had the time, and it wasn't my focus. I was so mad I couldn't understand why the center of pressure was not the same between the reality and the experiment. Um, but yes, I'm sure it will come in a couple of years, and there are more and more apps that exist to analyze your technique with iPhones. For example, if you put 2 iPhones in the same room, the deviation is not that big. So yeah, I'm sure it's going to be something we will learn in maybe 1 year or 2.
Yeah, I could do with that now at the moment, I think. And then for you, kind of when you were talking a little bit about the deadlift, what are some of the considerations that someone could kind of maybe implement into their own deadlift training or maybe their own deadlift technique?
I would say it's the same that I told about squat, that you need to experiment. And for example, around about the round back technique, for example, I know that some people want to keep their back as straight as possible all the time during training. So I used to be one of these. So I was training with my back perfectly straight, but when I was in competition under heavy loads, it was always rounding, and it was, of course, I think I was hurting myself, and I've changed my mind, and I think now I've just analyzed my position and said, okay, that's how my body feels the strongest. So now I am going to get stronger in that position. And as it's the same, I think it's also the same for bench press. Just try to analyze how your body moves when you're under heavy loads and try to understand what muscle contracts and what are your strong and weak muscles, and strengthen them and strengthen that position, instead of saying, I would like to lift like this. You're not going to lift like that. You're lifting this way. So just try to be strong this way.
No, that makes sense. I suppose where we kind of lose sight of a lot, maybe with technique in powerlifting, is we will traditionally spend a lot of time at sub-maximal loads, like Shane said, training at sub-maximal loads, and we'll be looking for perfect technique. But then when we get up into that 90, 95, 100% range is when we start to see the true, I suppose, specificity of our sport. And then we do start to see breakdown. And I think that breakdown, like you said earlier, does reveal an awful lot to us. I think in training as well, it is quite important to expose your lifters to some high RP work regularly to see if the program is working. Because I'm just thinking of a lifter I have at the moment, and we could see his quads were quite weak, his hip extensors were quite weak, but his kind of back was quite strong. So we did an awful lot of work on just building up general leg strength. But it was only when we kind of got onto the next block and we did some RP kind of doubles at a 9 that we could kind of see, okay, the hips got an awful lot stronger, but the quads are still kind of the limiting factor in the lift. Like you were saying earlier, that it is the case that we do need to bring in some heavy loading at some stage to see what's working and maybe what's not.
Yeah, and I think it's good also to, as you did, I guess, to make accessories and variations regarding what are the weak points and what not the optimal technique you would like them to have, but just to address muscle weakness rather than the technique itself. Because the technique will change if you strengthen the muscles.
Yeah,
or at least the breakdown. Shane, you go on. Sorry.
I like the 3-pronged approach that they use reactive training systems. So the Bondarchuk classification system of exercises. So they have the competition exercise, the special developmental exercises, and the special preparatory exercises. So competition exercise, obviously your competition squat, bench, deadlift. Special development exercise is something that improves the technical component of the lift. So it could be like a tempo squat, pause deadlift, long pause bench, something like that. And then the SPEs, so special preparatory exercises, something that's going to develop the general qualities that are going to enhance that lift. So say, for example, muscle mass, right? I like that approach for kind of getting better at those kind of higher intensity lifts, because like muscle size is going to be very much correlated to getting stronger over time. And then as well, the technical components too. You're going to have some kind of area which the bar speed is going to slow down the most, and potentially training that portion of the lift a little bit more with slightly higher intensities could be something to improve the bar speed at that portion of lift. So using something like a pause deadlift, but then obviously having the competition exercise in there too is necessary to get better at the actual thing, right? Because what you may do in RP9 pause deadlift, the absolute intensity is still lower to what it will be for RP9 deadlift. So you even if you do perfect your pause deadlift at RP9, the same compensation strategy could potentially pop up at your RP9 deadlift if you do not practice it. So going at it from all angles to improve the technique and improve that kind of weak range of motion or whatever, definitely from my experience seems to be the best way to go about it. Because again, you just can't negate utilizing the competition lift. If you are trying to improve the thing, you need to practice the thing that you're trying to improve.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how it was abroad, but that's something we've learned in the recent years. And I think that's also why the French lifters have gone stronger, because before that, the old school French lifting was that you would do 5 sets of 5, maybe not all year long, but basically all year long. And just 1 month before the competition, you would do 4 sets of 4, then 3 sets of 3, then 2 sets of 2, and then you would go on a single. But you wouldn't touch heavy weights a lot during the year. And even during off season, you would basically go run and not even lift. And I think that's why lifters were not that strong in France. And now that we do more specific work, thanks to opening to RTS, TSE and everything, and basically all the powerlifting international community, the powerlifting level here has grown a lot.
It is kind of amazing when you think about what how the popular opinion, just because it's the popular opinion, can be so wrong. Up until kind of how recently was that the case, that kind of older style, or maybe your older style, how long was that around until?
Until row, I would say. Until, I think the first time I heard about foreign training was Candito. So it was 2012,
2016.
13. But yeah, 15 maybe, I don't know. But I know that when I became, also in France, before 2015, we could only lift equipped. So it was a very different kind of training. Only junior could lift row, but when you were open category, you had to lift equipped. Well, no, only sub-junior could lift row. So for myself, I did 1 year row when I was a sub-junior, and then 3 years equipped. So the training was not the same, and we didn't know anything about abroad. So yeah, it's changed recently, and it's changed thanks to social media, but also, as I told before, thanks to Panalia and their community and their thinking out of the box. It's helped a lot.
Yeah, of course. I suppose even with the success of like a lot of the French lifters across the, like, all categories, I think from males and females, I think it is kind of a testament where a lot of the trends in powerlifting, I suppose, definitely as regards technique, you would see a lot of people even trying to imitate some of the French lifters. I suppose even the idea of this pre-hinge, a lot of that, I suppose, would come maybe from Leah.
French low bar.
I've even a French low bar as well. Yeah, that's another one. I suppose if you look at it, Nicholas, his type of sumo deadlift where he's extremely rounded, and there's a couple of other French guys that start off in that very, very rounded position. And I suppose the convention as regards sumo is that you need to be extremely upright, extremely neutral, and I suppose when you're competing at that level, and you're having the success that they are, I suppose, like you said, there is an element of you just have to think outside the box and find that technique that really, really works for you.
Yes, and I think also that something that might have helped is that we used to be with the weightlifting federation in France, and in weightlifting they are not under 100% loads. They're not doing 1 RM, so their technique is very beautiful, but that's really something that we've heard a lot in France from the weightlifters, that powerlifters don't look good, and so the old school powerlifters wanted to look like weightlifters, but that's not the same. And I think since we are now 2 separate federation, it's also helping that we no more try to squat like weightlifters, because they are the experts of squat.
100%, yeah. I suppose it is, like you said, where Olympic lifting is quite a funny sport, because relative to powerlifting, where a lot of the training for powerlifting is probably developed, even the periodization models are maybe derived from older weightlifting periodization models, the idea of maybe a linear or block approach would potentially come from that sphere. And I think in powerlifting, we have kind of had to develop our own models of periodization to maybe match the demands of the sport.
Yeah, exactly. And how about you? How was it in Canada and Ireland? Has it always been, have you been compared to weightlifting? And did you used to train like on a more classic way, or have you always thought that you needed to do like 90% plus loads in training?
Well, my initiation into training like a powerlifter started off like a bodybuilder. So it was I'd say it definitely did squat differently. I think I squatted more high bar, but I think starting off high bar is pretty normal for beginners when they're starting squatting, right? Like low bar is not like the typical, or it doesn't feel too comfortable when you are starting off as a beginner getting into that low bar position. So that would have been my start. And then as well with the likes of deadlift, probably wasn't a great technique either. Again, probably trained like a bodybuilder, just touch and go reps off the floor, similar with the likes of bench press, close grip, touch and go reps. I started off in Ireland. Like I've only been living in Canada for like the last few months. What about you, Lawrence?
How about you, Lawrence?
Don't even talk to me. I think all of my experience up until I came to college, I trained in a little leisure club in a small town where I'm from, and getting good, trustworthy information as regards kind of technique and what the right things to do and the right things to eat. And it was quite hard to find that information. So, like, I mean, for me, I was bodybuilding and I was trying to squat in knee wraps, and I was squatting very extremely high bar like Shane. I was doing touch and go deadlifts with very, very poor technique. And I think my bench, I don't think I ever touched my chest with the bar until I was maybe 19. I think I was training for 3 or 4 years before I touched the chest because I was afraid to hurt my shoulders. So
Press.
Okay, so I was the lucky one then, because I became
Yes.
in the powerlifting gym. So I've known since the beginning that you're not gonna break your knees if your knees go past your toes when you squat. So
yeah, I think where I suppose myself and Shane would be quite different. Definitely when I started lifting at, I think I was 15, and I kind of got into I became interested in bodybuilding and powerlifting quite early. But powerlifting in Ireland, because I'm 27, so that's 12 years ago, it was very much a different thing to what it is now, even as regards like you said there earlier, in Ireland, raw lifting wasn't really a thing yet. It was still heavily centered around equipped. There was a couple of raw lifters and there was a couple of federations, but everyone competed in wraps. There was no such thing really as the IPF, and all that kind of was there was untested powerlifting in wraps or equipment. And I suppose even the landscape of that now in Ireland is completely different, where the IPF is the dominant federation, and if people compete in wraps, they're nearly the outlier. I don't know. I don't even, when I started lifting, I don't even know anyone that owned a pair of knee sleeves. They weren't a thing. Nobody owned knee sleeves. And I know that sounds, I say this, I coach a lot of teenagers, and when I tell them, I distinctly remember seeing someone with a pair of SBD sleeves for the first time, and we were like, "What the fuck is that?" We were just like, "Why would you wear sleeves? You have wraps. There's no point." And now years later, if you put out a pair of knee wraps, everyone's like, "Whoa, whoa."
yeah. Honestly, in France, the row lifting appeared after the international row competition. So I think there have been like
Oh yeah,
row worlds for 2 years, and after that, the French Federation organized the first row nationals. And since then, the number of people competing has like been multiplied by a lot.
yeah. It's
But
Mm.
nearly
I
gone up
remember,
exponentially from.
yeah. But I was
Go ahead.
asking this question because I did 6 months in Waterloo, Canada, and I remember going to the uni gym, and there were nine spots, nine powerlifting bars, and at 7 a.m. all of the bars were used, and there were rope bench, and people were learning how to deadlift sumo in college, and I was like, wow, what's happening in France? If you're going to the gym in a college, they don't even know what a deadlift is, and if you see them
Yeah.
squat, they won't put their knees past their toes. So I thought you were a lot in advance compared to Europe.
Yeah, well, even just from being in one of the powerlifting gyms over here, which I train in like about half the week, uh, even the average level lifter in that gym is extremely strong, really technically proficient, has really good knowledge base as well. But I do think the likes of the US and Canada, they are always kind of ahead in regards to like the strength sports in a sense, right? Because a lot of it had started here. Like the likes of bodybuilding, the likes of powerlifting, they probably did originate more so from this kind of area. Uh, they have, you know, they have in Texas like a high school powerlifting federation.
Yeah,
They
it's
have
crazy.
powerlifting
Yeah,
teams in schools,
Yeah. It's
and
not
even
even
for the
allowed to
type of
be
sports that are big over here,
powerlifting
like the
before
likes
13
of
years old in
the big
France.
kind of the American football. I know they play it in Canada as well, so they call it Canadian football. Big physical sports, and they're doing a lot of powerlifts in their like S&C work. So I can see, and there's huge amount of money pumped into all of their sports as well over here. So I can see why it would have gravitated towards that for even just people who are dropping out from those sports. And because again, a lot of the big manufacturers are over here making cheaper equipment, more gyms, more space for big powerlifting gyms, which again in Ireland it's a little bit limited in regards to space for powerlifting gyms as opposed to just commercial gyms. Whereas commercial gyms over here, a lot of them even still have powerlifting equipment, and powerlifters as well. So I think could it just be as well the amount of people who are over here too? That's also a thing, right? 330 million people in the States, entire continent essentially, as well as Canada. So more people, more powerlifters, more advancements in the kind of sport, and greater knowledge base as a result. And then as well, the actual information that comes out. I suppose you have the benefit of the States, the UK, Canada, all being primarily English speaking countries. A lot of the research being done in English as well. And then it takes a while for that to disseminate to the likes of European countries, which do not have English as their first language.
yeah. I think even you said something there that I always think about, but in America, I know in America in particular, versus in Ireland and maybe in Europe, if you don't make it to professional sports beyond the age of maybe 18, 19, or you don't maybe get a scholarship for college, a lot of the time, once you've kind of gone past collegiate level, a lot of people will drop out of playing organized sports. So you could have people that were extreme outliers, maybe as regards, I don't know, force production or maybe their sprint speed or whatever, and they maybe due to being unlucky, maybe with injury or maybe being not skilled enough, found their way into powerlifting. Like I suppose if you look at a lot of the high level American IPF lifters, a lot of them would have competed to a relatively high level in high school or collegiate sports. So I think in Ireland, at least, like with the GAA and soccer, rugby, offering an alternative, or not an alternative, but I mean, you can play. Jesus, you could play junior B well up until you're in your 40s, or there's over 35 soccer leagues. You could play junior rugby if your body is still still intact well into your 40s. And if it's not, I suppose you just keep throwing on deep heat until it is otherwise.
There is also another factor of, and you notice from training in somewhere like abs, when you're training around people who are stronger than you, it
100%.
seems like more of a reality for something that you can achieve too. So it kind of takes you out of that potentially a self-limiting mindset as well that you might set for yourself as a standard lifter in a normal gym, because you can see the people being more advanced. You can potentially see the techniques that they're doing as well. You learn from them, but also as a result of just being able to see the more advanced lifters, you can kind of benefit from that too. Because sometimes progression can also be limited by just your mental capacity. You know, if you consider a 2.5 kilo increase of your squat per year to be the height that you can achieve, but then you see somebody else 10, 20, it kind of removes that almost pessimistic attitude from the rate that you could potentially progress, right? Because if you have the mindset of potentially increasing this by 20 kilo per year, like while it could be a bit of a reach, because you're reaching for it and you're probably pushing towards that in regards to like your implementation of your training, the effort you're bringing in towards your sets, how you are potentially recovering because you want that goal, versus how it is going to be when you know the reward is very small, that could again affect your outcomes.
I suppose for you, Charlotte, you've obviously been lifting for quite a while, and you kind of seem to have gotten right back into the swing of things with training. Could you maybe talk a little bit through maybe how you found getting back into powerlifting after having your baby?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, I think I need to say that I never stopped training. When I knew that when I learned that I was pregnant, I went to the doctor and I had the chance that all the medical specialists around me, they said it was okay to keep on training. So I've had the chance to keep on training until I gave birth to Amelia. I was squatting maybe 3 days before giving birth, so I never stopped. But I have to admit that having a home gym makes it way easier to train. And when I came back from the hospital after 3 days, I really needed just to do something my body knew. It was more mental, like I needed for my mental health more than my body, just because giving birth and having a baby that depends only on you and is crying most of the time is really tiring. So spending 1 hour in the gym is so helpful for that. So I trained only bench press, feet up 3 days after, and it felt good. So I just listened to my body as people told me during pregnancy, and I asked to Emily from TSG PT and Plants to help me with my postpartum return to lifting. So that's how I did. Basically, at the beginning, I did only bench for a while, especially as we had bench nationals 8 weeks after Amelia was born. So it was my chance. I had the chance to qualify being 8 months pregnant. And then I was nearly underweight, but I was in the same weight category. And I did bench nationals and finished second with Amelia on the podium, which was an amazing experience. And so I think lifting postpartum was great, just for my health, like mental health, and also just to keep on moving. And it's easy to adapt in a gym. For example, instead of doing squats at the beginning, I was doing goblet squat with my baby in my arms. And instead of deadlift, I started with Romanian deadlift, but it was all very progressive. And I did a competition in May, and I did 315 total, and my best total is 365. So it's not, I'm not at my best. I was not at my best, but after 5 months, I thought it was okay, and it's good to get back to training and challenging.
Yeah, that's unreal.
But
A great. Go ahead.
yeah, I have to admit that I wanted to train during and after pregnancy, thanks to the both Megans I saw on Instagram who did this, and I thought that it was very beautiful. And yeah, we have the chance to do a sport that has not non-contact, and so it's healthy. And my baby was super healthy. I gave birth just on the right day, not before, not after. So yeah, I can only recommend people, well, women who are pregnant and healthy, to try to keep on training for their general health, for their mental health, and yeah, for everything.
And how did you kind of find getting back into? I know you said you were benching for a while and you were even benching feet up. How long did it take you to kind of get back to lower body exercises? And I would imagine particularly bracing would have been pretty difficult to maybe begin with.
Yeah, well, if I were listening to the French medical staff, they would have told I would have waited 2 months. But Emily, like, we did tests with Emily, and that was healthy, and my perineum was going well. So maybe only after 4 or 5 weeks, I got back to squatting. And the belt, I can't really remember, maybe 3 months postpartum. But honestly, it went very well. And I've had my cousin since then who was pregnant, gave birth, and get back to training postpartum. And she even pushed harder than me. And yeah, I think in France, we are very careful, maybe a bit too much, regarding what the body can do and what women can do when they are pregnant or postpartum. But in the US, they are more open-minded about this. And I think that if you just listen to your body, and if it's only green flags, then just go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Again, I can't really talk from experience, but I do. I think I do know of the lifter you were talking about. I think what kind of brought this to the fore for a lot of people. There was a competitor on Instagram. I think she was maybe 8 months pregnant. Am I right in saying? Um, she competed beltless, and I think she set maybe a 400 kilo total or something.
In Ireland, yes, and she's competing in
Yeah.
December at Europeans, and I won't be there, but I would like so much to meet her, because yeah, after I saw her on Instagram, and I was like, okay, I could have pushed way harder. So next pregnancy, I will go all in for sure.
You'll be aiming for a 380 total or PB total the next time the next time you're pregnant.
Yeah, we'll try.
And for you then, how would you say you are now relative to maybe when you were just in the couple of weeks postpartum? Are you kind of fully recovered?
Yes, I do feel fully recovered. It's just the main problem I've had is that at the competition I did in May, it was SBD, and I had never done SBD session before the competition. So at the
Oh,
end of the deadlift, I could feel that my perineum was tired, and I needed to train it a little bit more, but that's all. I mean, my legs and all my body were fully recovered. It's just some regular training, but you see women pee on the platform even without having babies. So I think it's just something you need to work on during your lifting career, because I was talking to Shane just before you arrived. I can't say I'm 100%, but it's not because of my pregnancy. It's just because we've had the wedding, I've had the PhD, and I went coaching junior at Worlds and Europeans. So training hasn't been my priority the last month but if it were, I think I could have pushed 100.
yeah, definitely. That's that's a very busy year. And what kind of things did you do? Maybe have you done differently in your training or added in maybe to address
Yes,
maybe
the first thing Emily made
the
me do
core
was a lot of
weakness
breathing
afterwards that you said?
and core and perineum training, and that's also something I try to do more now, um, because it's the part of the body that gets all messed up the most by the baby being in, and I can definitely feel the difference. So I'm trying to concentrate a lot on it, but I think, yeah, it's mainly that part and perineum and breathing. And I've also had a problem before that my bracing was not the best even before my pregnancy, so it was a good time to work on that. But yeah, abs are not the best after a pregnancy, but if you work it hard,
Oh,
it's coming back.
deadly.
Well, at least for me, but I haven't had twins, so I think every pregnancy is
Well,
different and every woman might experience something different.
Yeah, of course.
was there any specific drills that you found to be quite helpful for like improving your bracing capacity after the pregnancy? Like anything specific you were adding
Just
into your training beforehand to
as I
warm
was
up,
saying, just
or
breathing, and Emily made me do some breathing with my hands on my stomach to really feel when it was inflating, and to do the 365-degree breathing and really feel all my body that was when I was breathing. And yeah, that's something that helped me a lot. And also, I think it's important after a pregnancy maybe to go see a chiro and experience changing in your technique, because your body has changed and I can feel the difference on my movement. I don't squat the same way I used to squat, maybe just because I've tried to change and now I have narrow feet and I don't feel comfortable having such a wide deadlift. But it's I don't know if it's just because I've experienced a change or if it's because of a pregnancy, but I think both can be linked.
Yeah, that's an
yeah,
interesting enough one that maybe the wider you're not liking the wider
Yes,
stance.
but
So have you
I
narrowed your
pulled
stance then in
conventional at the
the deadlift? Are
competition.
you
Yeah,
still pulling sumo?
I should have mentioned this. I did pull conventional at the competition because I wasn't feeling comfortable after pregnancy with the sumo deadlift. I felt that I could pee on myself and that conventional was more
Mm.
comfortable. So I'm slowly getting back to sumo. But yes, that was the major change
Yeah,
I did postpartum. And also my squat, I squat narrow, but I think it might be just because I never tried before.
yeah, that's kind of interesting. I suppose it does make sense that that kind of narrower
Yeah,
stance, there might be a little bit, you might be able to
yeah, and
brace
maybe it's just
a little
for
bit
to feel
better
more
with
confident,
maybe
and
that
because I
narrower
was
stance.
afraid, I can't really tell. But yes, there are some changes postpartum, but I really think that it's the same as during the pregnancy. If like your body are sending you signs, if you've been lifting for a while, you should know when something feels comfortable or when if it feels weird. And if it doesn't feel natural, just try something else.
Yeah, I suppose that like you said, it's kind of the principles of training still apply to you if you're pregnant, that, or if you're postpartum, that there will be a strong element of going by feel, and that no two pregnancies are the same as well. That the
Yeah,
the recovery afterwards, or maybe the effects in the body, could be so different from individual to individual that
yeah,
you
and
will
I
kind of
think
have to
also
go
the
off how
fatigue of
you're
having a
feeling and what
baby and waking up
your
at
body is telling
night
you.
makes it different, because you can't train heavy. Like basically you will do, well, I was doing more long sets and
Mm.
trying to build muscle instead of intensity, just because I was too tired to get into high RPEs, except the last maybe 3 weeks before the competition. But I was only training 4 times 1 hour a week, but it was all I could do with my baby, and it was okay. In the end, it was okay because you're still a bit detrained after giving birth, so just trying to stick to a regular training, even if it's not as long and as heavy as you used to do, you're still progressing, and then you can get back to normal training.
Yeah,
yeah, it does. It is quite important, as you were saying there, in regards to like utilizing the variations for what you're able to do, because I suppose when you are competing in something like powerlifting, or you're used to that being your sport, sometimes when you're maybe going through a period where you're not able to kind of perform those lifts as well as you would like to be. Obviously, if you're pregnant and you're going through pregnancy postpartum, you're probably not able to perform the competition squat, bench, deadlift as best as you would like to, but still being able to utilize those variations like load lifting, where you're still able to add in some form of exercise into your week. Obviously, it benefit you greatly, right? So you mentioned you're able to do your goblet squats with your baby, bench press with feet up, doing the likes of dumbbell remaining deadlifts, but that still gives you some pathway of progression while still being able to do exercise as part of like your weekly process, because there is obviously the added benefits of just improve your mental health, improve your energy, that exercise can really help people do. And I suppose I can't speak from a woman's perspective, but I suppose when women do get pregnant and maybe they don't have exercise as a core part of their life prior to getting pregnant, they can see it as like, maybe this is going to be like damaging for me to incorporate. Whereas obviously you're a great example of somebody who has been able to incorporate that all the way through the pregnancy and recovery,
and
allow
there's
you to
only
recover
one
quicker.
thing I would change is that I would do more back training, because when you have a baby, you spend all your time carrying it and being like this, and I've had so much back soreness that if you're pregnant, try to do some back training, because carrying a baby all day long can be really tiring. Yes.
That can be the title of the podcast, I think. If you're pregnant, do more back training. And when you said you did your last, or you were squatting 3 days before you gave birth. What was that like? Like, obviously you were really, really pregnant at that stage. So did it change your center of gravity?
Honestly,
like
in squat I felt way more stable. I usually don't feel stable in squat, but having a big belly, and so my sense of pressure was right in the middle of my foot, and it was so much stable. And I could get depth even at 9 months pregnant. But I did, maybe if you scroll through my Instagram, I did one post on it. Because I was training in pajamas. I wanted to do nothing but gave birth, so I was just going from bed till the gym, just get some training. It was super light, only 40 kilos, but it was still some moving. And just after giving birth, it was also the same, that all I wanted to do was get some movement. And when I first got my baby sleeping and have some time for me, I just did some stretching, moving, and I think it's really helpful to get moving during pregnancy and after pregnancy. Even if the loads are super light, it's still helpful for your baby. And even when you give birth, they told me at the hospital that it was good that I had good abs.
But not enough back training.
I suppose that's one thing that a lot of women struggle with, though, isn't it? After pregnancy, is if they do if they stop training and then they start to gain weight as a result of becoming more sedentary, and then post pregnancy, they can find themselves not only potentially having like postnatal depression, but also just being unhappy with how their body looks and their body image is as a result of kind of gaining the weight and then struggling inevitably with losing it as a result of now being a busy mom as well. So did you find that to be a benefit of continuing to train when you were pregnant?
Everything changes in your body during pregnancy and outside when you give birth. So you're losing, like, everything changes, but the lifting is still the lifting. So when you go to the gym, a bar is still a bar, and it's something I found it helped me gain confidence, just because I was doing something I knew and something I liked. And if you can get your baby, get someone take care of your baby to have 1 hour training, it's perfect. But also, just sometimes I couldn't, and I was getting Amelia to the gym, and just moving with her is still some moving, and it's fun. And now that she's a bit older, and when she's at the gym at the same time, it's so much fun. She's watching us train, and she seems to like it, so it's great. But yes, it helped me a lot. I'm not an international lifter, so clearly training was just for my health and for my well-being, and not for any performance.
And at what point do you think Amelia will jump in the bar now? Have you and Nicholas discussed
Well, first we'll see if she likes it
what
or
age you're going
not,
to
but
introduce
yeah,
introduce her
whenever
to
she wants.
powerlifting?
But as I told you, in France, it's not before 14 years old, so she still has time. She can do some rugby before.
Oh yeah, she's a bit. Yeah, we might see her in in a France jersey before we see her in a France singlet.
Oh no, I was just saying we'll see if she likes it. But she seems to, and even when I was pregnant, that was funny because in competition, when I was coaching Nico at Junior Worlds, I was already pregnant, like 6 months pregnant, and I could feel her move. So whenever Nico was lifting, she could feel the adrenaline for sure, and she was like moving a lot in my belly. So I think she likes deadlifts. Yeah.
Deadlift specialist. Thanks so much for that, Charlotte. Is there anything else, Shane, we kind of wanted to go through, or is that pretty much everything?
I think we pretty much covered everything. We went through Charlotte's PhD, pregnancy, went through the evolution of kind of lifting in France as well as Ireland. Is there anything else that you would like to kind of touch on before we wrap up, Charlotte, or anything?
No, I just wanted to thank you both for inviting me, and that was a really interesting talk. So we'll see in 5 or 6 years if all we've talked about has changed or not with USAPL and everything else. But yeah, that's pretty much all.
Well, thank you very much, Charlotte. Would you like to tell listeners at home where they might be able to find more about you?
You can find me on
any
Instagram.
Kind of links
I would love to share my experience with other women.
Thank you very much for coming on, Charlotte. It's a pleasure to have you. And yeah, if you did enjoy the podcast at home, make sure to, first of all, go over to Charlotte's Instagram, give her a follow. And if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to share it on your Instagram stories, leave us a rating and review, whatever podcast platform you're listening on. And we will catch you in the next one.